I just say for a start off, I have never ever spoken at a conference like this before. And you can tell that because as Pádraig O'Cinnéide thanked me for, I'm not wearing a tie, and I haven't got a PowerPoint presentation. I have a shopping bag. So, and what did they do? They wedged me in between the biggest oil company in Ireland and Supermac. So I'm not used to this kind of an audience. And I was thinking about this in the car coming up yesterday, and I said, what am I going to say to these people? In Christy Moore speak, I'm an ordinary man. But I'm an ordinary man that now has an extraordinary story. And really the reason I'm here is because I'm not supposed to be here at all. So I'm going to tell you that story now. In 2002, I'm going to set my stopwatch so you won't be giving out to me or standing up. In 2002, nearly 10 years ago, I was diagnosed with one of the most gravest forms of cancer anybody can get. I was given very little chance of survival. And the standout lines that evolved in my case were, my very first consultant, John Fenton in Limerick, said to me, he said, Liam, you're the second worst case I've ever seen, and the worst case was dead in a month. Now, I'm very good friends with John Fenton ever since. We got on very well from the start. And I meet him now about once a year. And I say to him, well, John, when the third fellow comes along, you can say to him, the first fellow was dead in a month, but the second fellow was Taoiseach 8 years later. Or some similar line. And he laughs first, and then he says, Liam, you're right. You have given me a fantastic comparative study to encourage my third fellow with, or third girl, that I hope they will follow your route rather than the first fellow. John was an ENT consultant, not an oncologist. So he felt, based on the only comparative he had for me, I was beyond treatment. There was nowhere for me to go. But eventually, we found an oncologist who looked at my case, and for the first time I was with a man who knew exactly what he was looking at. And his line was, Liam, you have an extremely risky procedure ahead of you. Everything is against you. I give you a 5% chance of coming out of this, as Pádraig said. I know that man very well since too, Simon Rogers in Liverpool. Simon and I are now very good friends. And he has told me it's lovely to live on and hear all the little bits of detail that you didn't get to find out at the time, or that they couldn't tell you. And he said, Liam, it was nowhere near 5%. You were way below that. He said, I actually didn't think you were going to make it, but you impressed me with your fighting spirit, and with your wife's fighting spirit, I had to give you something to fight for. So it's great to be able to, so it's not even 5%. But as Pádraig said in the first speech, the huge difference is between 1% and 0%. It's when you've nowhere to go for your fight. Then, before I was diagnosed, typical man, knew nothing about cancer, knew nothing about disease. I didn't even know cancer was staged. 1, 2, 3, 4. Mine was stage 4. A consultant down the line said to me, he said, Liam, yours is so advanced. Yours could be classed as stage 44. And then the last one of the 4 is Simon Rogers also said to me a couple of months later, he said, Liam, you got on the bus to terminal cancer with all the doors locked, and you somehow managed to get yourself off at the last stop. So there are the 4 big statements in my treatment that just makes it such a big story. So I'll go right back then to 2002. It began with headaches, intermittent headaches. I was a typical man. I did nothing. They weren't strong enough to stop me working. My brilliant wife Pam over there, at the end of a week, gave me a choice. You go to the doctor or we get divorced. So I went, thanks be to God I went to the doctor. I'll just put it in context. I'd never been ill, I'd never carried weight, I'd never smoked. I'd run 6 marathons. Sorry, Pádraig, full marathons. And the medics liked this bit of my story. I did not fit the bill. I wasn't 22 stone chain smoking. I was a man who shouldn't have got cancer. And we'll talk about that too, because there's no shut-ins. This is a predatory disease that does not comply to any rules and regulations when it goes to seek out its victims. All of my family smoked. Most of my friends smoked. I never smoked. So I started with the doctor, went to a course of antibiotics for what we all thought was a sinus complaint. Then to the dentist, just in case I had an abscess in the roof of my mouth. When there was nothing there, I was eventually admitted to the regional hospital in Limerick, where I met John Fenton. And I was going in for a routine procedure that's called a sinus wash, where they flush out any infection in your sinus. Now, the regional in Limerick, I was in for 2 nights. I was on Ward 2C, which has one of the most fantastic people I've ever met, the ward's Sister Carmel O'Sullivan. John Fenton was about my own age. John had spent 3 years in Liverpool, where I had studied. We got on instantly. We had loads to talk about, pubs we had drank in, restaurants we had eaten in. So I began to treat this 2 days in Limerick almost like a mini hotel break. I brought in a stack of newspapers that I hadn't got to read for the previous 2 weeks. I had 2 days off the phone. John came up to me and said, "This is a routine procedure. I've done thousands of these. We'll have you in and out." I said, "This is great." Pam was coming in, bringing me treats and biscuits and chocolates. And so I went down for the procedure the next day, and all I had to do was go back to the ward, rest up, and I would be released from the hospital the following day. That morning, I was dressed, sitting up in my bed, and I saw John Fenton. I was in a 2-bed ward. I saw John Fenton and Carmel beside him on his rounds coming to my door. As they came, I sat bolt upright on the bed with a big smile on my face. Now, this is the pivotal moment for all cancer stories. The moment you get the news. In my case, I was to get worse news than this down the line. But that day will always stand out as the worst of all. And it does, because you go from 60 to 0 in seconds. You have no knowledge of or preparation for the world you are about to enter into, especially as a man. And so as I was emitting out my smile, all I could see was serious faces coming back in response, and everything just started to move in slow motion. I thought, what's going on here? These people, I was laughing and joking with these people yesterday, and now they're acting as if they don't know me. And then I could see, trailing behind them was an entourage of about 6 or 7 house doctors and students. And they just kept coming, came right into my bed, pulled the curtain around it, and John Fenton leaned down into me and he said, "Liam, this is very serious." And really he didn't have to say much more. On those words alone, the bottom dropped out of my world. And it was like being thrown out of an airplane without a parachute. The patient that day, you know nothing about cancer or grades of cancer or types of cancer. You just think you're going to die. And again, to correlate with what Pádraig said, that's the key point. That's when your job starts. Because your cancer fight must start at 0. You can't go back into minus territory and start going, "Why me? I've run 6 marathons, I've never smoked. It should be him. He smokes 40 a day. It should be him." It's too late for that. That's just going to take you into negative territory. You've got to get back to note. And what I say to people is, if you win the lotto tomorrow, if your auntie leaves you a car, you don't then go, "Why me? I've no money," or "I've loads of money. It should be Pádraig Amolja. He's no money at all."
Right?
I only heard that mightn't be true. So you can't cherry pick your way through life. Life has uncertainty every day, and the downs are with the ups. And I've said that to cancer patients, that is where you start. You start at naught, and there's only one direction to go from there. So, but as I said, it was a whole new world, and the only link I had was John Fenton. So I said, "John, man to man, friend to friend at this stage, if this was you, what would you do?" And as it turned out, we'd been talking about Liverpool a few days earlier. The 3 years he had spent there were in what he considered to be the best head and neck cancer facility in Europe. And he said, "Liam, you don't just need one very difficult procedure, you need 2. You're going to need extensive, very, very complicated surgery in your head, and then you're going to need radical radiotherapy after that. And he said you might get one or other of those throughout the world, one in Toronto and another in Munich. But he said Liverpool is the place where I think you'll get the two of those together. He still thought I was beyond treatment at that point. But he said, I'm going to send you to Liverpool, you will then meet your two oncologists over there, and they will decide. So my life was going to be in the hands of the two men I was going to meet within a week. And I sat and Pam went over. We were in a room with Simon Rogers, who was the maxillofacial surgeon in Aintree University Hospital, and David Husband, who was the senior radiologist in Clatterbridge on the Wirral. Simon spoke first. He was the surgeon, and he described the procedure that I would have to go through if they cleared me for treatment. And he explained that a tumour as advanced as mine, in where it was, your head is obviously one of the worst places to get cancer. It's your computer, your eyes, ears, nose, brain, mouth. And he said the normal procedure for a tumour like mine is to remove it completely surgically and take a further centimetre all around as a precaution. Then the radiotherapy is used as a follow-up to kill anything that may be left behind. But he said in my case this was not going to be possible, because my tumour was so advanced it was right up against my brainstem. So there was no guarantee that would remove it all physically. So I was going to be over-reliant on radiotherapy to kill what they couldn't get at. And that's what brought me down to the less than 5%. Now, there's a lovely story in the 5% that Porry could have told. I was in Galway 6 months before this, and I met a great friend of mine, Paddy Hines from Athlone, that I'd worked with years ago. And we had lunch together at a conference. And Paddy told me he had beaten bowel cancer, serious bowel cancer, twice in the last couple of years. And I'm back to the man thing. If he told me he'd shaken off a heavy head cold, he probably would have got a similar response. I didn't have a clue, really, what he was saying to me. I thought, well, that probably was a mild one. So when Paddy Hines heard I was given a 5% chance, he rang me up. And he said, Liam, I believe you've been given a 5% chance. I said, I have, Paddy, yeah. He said, that's fantastic. Sorry, Paddy, what do you mean? He said, Liam, that is fantastic. He said, if it's 1 in 100, it's you. You're young, you're fit, you're tough. You're going to take this on, you're going to do it. The 100% includes men in their 70s are going to be thrown in the towel. Fellas who have smoked all their lives. Fellas who are not going to take this on the way you were. But it's not 1 in 100. It's 5 in 100. You have 5 times more chance than you need. But he was right. When I took it on, he said, I suddenly said yes. Now, this story goes on, because I had four great friends of mine in Ballina became my minders. And I was meeting them the next day. Barney Kennedy, Ian Connolly, Bob Noonan and Gina Reynolds. And I was full of Paddy Hines now. Once we were playing a Heineken Cup that day, and I prayed to God they'd win. They didn't, because I was going to break this news. So I said to the 4 lads, I said, lads, wait, I've great news. I told them I had cancer first. And they said, but wait, fantastic news. I've been given a 5% chance. Isn't that brilliant? And with that, I went up and I went off to the loo. And again, a little story, lovely little story you hear about 4 or 5 years later. Apparently, the 4 of them put their heads in their hands and said, my Jesus, not only has he cancer, but now he's gone mad as well. So it is fantastic to live and to hear all these little bits. I also, in later years, met somebody who was in the theatre the day of my sinus wash. And again, the other side of the anaesthetic, all the staff, happy clappy, 1,000 of days before. And John Fenton took out, he described it to me later as like a cheese-like substance in the middle of my head. And but the staff had never seen one. It was the equivalent of him taking an alien out of my head. They had never seen it. 2 of them apparently practically fainted. So they're the little pluses to have lived on and to pick up all these little dots and commas that you missed in yourself first time around. So I was given the 5% chance. Now, back to running. I've been an amateur runner on and off through the years, stop-start. When I was diagnosed and given this chance, I saw my duty then as to be the best possible patient I could be once I went on that slab. My operation was huge. It took a month to prepare. It was going to be 12 hours long. I wanted it tomorrow, now that they said I could go. But again, knew nothing about the health industry. They're the ultimates. It doesn't get any bigger than saving or improving people's lives. It puts what the rest of us do to shame in many ways. They're fantastic people. So my job was to have my head straight and to be the fittest person I could be once I went on that slab. So I started to run with Ian Connolly, my great friend. And apart from that, the first day when I got the news, I feel that was my piece in the jigsaw. That I just, as I said, I didn't go back past zero. I went out, and running is brilliant, because if you have to run 6 miles, you have to run every step of it. You can play a team game and score the winning goal in the last minute, but you know here you played a bad match. But you're getting all the 6 inches into the pat and backs and kicking the arse. If you have to run 6 miles, it's going to take a couple of thousand of those, and there's nothing to shorten it for you. That was exactly what I needed in here for a long, difficult procedure that was ahead of me over the next 4 months. So, 8th of July 2002 was my surgery. 12-hour operation. Simon Rogers, fantastic man that he is. And he came and he sat on my bed 2 days later. It was 2 days in intensive care, and then I got back to the ward. I was more machine than man. I was breathing through a tracheostomy. I was being fed directly into my stomach through a PEG tube. I had about 12 tubes coming out of me. I couldn't walk, talk, eat, drink or sleep. He sat on the end of my bed and he said to me, "Liam, we're quite happy. We feel it's gone well. We won't know. We've a long way to go." He reminded me, he said, "Your operation was as big as they come. It was as big as what somebody would receive after a major car accident." He said, "I'll show you my eye." He said, "We cut you from your ear across to your nose. We broke your jaw. We cut you down to your Adam's apple. We peeled your jaw away." The next bit he described as like taking the engine out of a car. You want to fix the engine, but to take it out and work on it, you have to disconnect all of the connections it's making to the rest of the car. So they had to sever all of the nerves that were in their way. They were doing nothing wrong, but they couldn't get at the tumour. That was very delicate work. Then they removed the tumour from the sinus around my eye back to my brainstem. He said for a lot of those hours they were within millimetres of both my brain and spine. I was just in awe of this man as he was describing this work that had been done. 12 hours is a long day for anybody. 12 hours I'm not belittling, in a cafe. These incredible people were 12 hours in the middle of my head. So then, the cancer was so advanced, it had eaten all of the soft tissue in the pocket of my head, but then it was also attacking my cheekbones. So they had to take a slice of bone off my hip. They removed half the roof of my mouth and half my top set of teeth. They took lining off my stomach to make what's called a flap to reseal my mouth. Now, there was a 95% chance that would work. So I thought, hey, that's good. And then I said, wait a minute now. You can't be doing this. You can't be just picking whatever. And then I thought, yes, I can. So, if the flap didn't work, I would have to have what's called a bone, which is effectively like a denture. And he just said to me that, we're talking quality of life issue. If I drank, I would get leakage down up to my nose. Bobby Robson, God rest him, had a bone. The flap worked. So the 95% worked and the 5% worked. So they took lining off my stomach to repair the top of my mouth. They took bone off my hip. I have 2 screws in here. And they also took more lining off the stomach I had a massive hole here. So when they were done, the eye had dropped about 1 inch and I still have this hole here. And he just said in the last couple of hours, everything was still as tense and as difficult as it was in the first. And he admitted, he said, we were all exhausted. And then I have 130 stitches from here going down to here. And they had to be tiny because they wanted to minimize any facial scarring. And I was, of course, not awake for any of this, but I know about the stitches because I remember the poor little nurse who came to take them out about a week later. She had to use a magnifying glass because each stitch was just about the same length as my facial hair that were beginning to grow back. So she had to pick the stitches out of 10,000 facial hairs that were growing and very similar, and it took her hours, but she did it. So I went back to the ward after 2 days in intensive care, and I was at this stage. When I would run and run badly, I would adopt a policy of run what you see. Don't worry about the 6 miles or the 10 miles or the 26 miles. Get to the top of the next bend or the top of the next hill or around the next bend, and so on and so on. I broke it down into digestible chunks. I did exactly the same with my recovery. This is where the running mentality really stood to me. I didn't worry about when will I go to a wedding again in the Connemara Coast Hotel. I wanted one little bit of progress for each day. And I remember when a nurse came in the next day and took out the first tube, it was out of my foot, it was an anaesthetic feed in my foot. I remember clenching the fist and going, 1 gone, 11 more to go. And that was the spirit that saw me through a long, difficult recovery. And for that, I have my running to thank. So, after 2 weeks, I was about to break all kinds of records for recovery after a major operation. And it was almost too good to be true. And it was. I got meningitis. And I have a fantastic person over here to thank for that. Pam was coming in to see me twice daily. She picked up that I was not progressing the way I had been. And she insisted a doctor was brought, and it discovered that initially they were worried I had hydrocephalus, which would be water in the brain. I didn't, but I went from the frying pan to the fire. But it wasn't hydrocephalus, it was meningitis. I was critical for 3 days. I was in the neuro wing of the hospital. And so there's 2 lives gone now at this stage. I was a further 2 weeks there, recovering from the meningitis. But it was under control. But what this was doing now, it was eating into my zone between surgery and radiotherapy. The radiotherapist didn't want to delay too long because you're giving the tumour a chance to re-establish itself. But there were more pitfalls to come. When I was released out of the hospital eventually, I got a deep vein thrombosis and I was rushed back into the Royal in Liverpool. Again, that was caught just in time. Eventually, I got to start radiotherapy. That was in a different hospital in Liverpool under Dave Husband. Now, the shopping bag. As a patient, you always focus, and I always go to Simon Rogers first, and I feel a little bit guilty because the surgery is so physical, and you've better understanding of it. I mean, when he explained at the end of the bed what they'd done, I could, as a layman, understand it. Radiotherapy is much more of a silent assassin. I was an outpatient at that stage. I was putting my life back into some kind of shape. I had family and friends coming over from Ireland. I was out and about to a small degree. So radiotherapy was much more of a passive treatment, if you like, and you were going in for this invisible X-ray, and you thought, well, this is okay. But years later, long after the scars have healed, the one that's waiting for you in the long grass is the effects of your radiotherapy. Because every cancer patient that has had extensive radiotherapy will be tired for about 3 years. And that's from your radiotherapy, that's not from your surgery. But as I said, radiotherapy is scientific. David Husband had worked out both the exact dosage I needed and three different angles that the rays needed to go into attack where he had worked out the tumour was most likely to be. So the only way to ensure that every day was that to make sure my head was in exactly the same position. And the only way they could do that was they made a plaster cast of my face and made a mask so that I was effectively bolted to the table every day to ensure my head was in exactly the same position. So I became the man in the plastic mask. There is my radiotherapy mask in clear perspex. And as I lay down, it was fixed here, so they knew, I think some of the markings are still on it, my head was in exactly, and then the machine, it was like something out of Star Trek. It hovered to its 3 different positions. The staff left the room, and the radiotherapy was admitted to me. So, surgery was the 8th of July 2002. On the 16th of October 2002, 4 months later, we packed up our car and we sailed back to Ireland. I was done. The first miracle had been achieved. I had got through my treatment and was still alive. A month later, we did what seemed the right thing to do. We went to the Canary Islands for a family holiday. Pam and the 3 kids not only needed it but deserved it. And for me too, it seemed to make like good sense. Rather than recuperate in the cold, wet November of Ireland, to get some winter sunshine. I was 2 days in the Canaries. I got meningitis again. The 2-week dream holiday turned into 3 weeks in the Central Hospital in Gran Canaria. I was not a happy patient. I was a great patient up to this, and I caught myself out. You can't always adopt a positive attitude. You can't just tell somebody to get out, grab it off the shelf. For the first week, I was in denial. I said, I am out here to have a holiday. I was trying to get out of the hospital. Meningitis drives you a bit loony anyway. Eventually, I got my focus back, got my running focus back. I said, Liam, you've meningitis again. You just put your blinkers on, you take the medication, and you get out of here. And you probably never go back to the Canaries again. But anyway, that's not the Canary Islands' fault. So, we're well past miracles 2, 3 and 4 at this stage. A big one was, they didn't know how much, the bit of the surgery that they couldn't predict was, okay, they didn't know how the mouth would go back. There was so much bone to be taken out. So the fact, and I can only open my mouth about that much, but as you can see, I can talk perfectly. I can also eat anything I want. Even if I go into one of Pat's places, I have to shuffle in the burgers a bit. I can't chomp them the way I used to. But they're still eaten, and they're still gorgeous. So this story has gone on and on. My recovery has outdone my survival. I spent my second lifetime putting back the little milestones. They started from learning to walk, talk, eat, drink, run again. 2 big ones then were to run seriously and to work seriously again. Both of those went in place in the last couple of years. 2 years ago I ran 4 10Ks. Last year I ran a 10K in Liverpool with my surgeon Simon Rogers. So 8 years after the 5% chance, patient and surgeon and patient together. It was a fundraiser for the hospital over there. 3 years ago, I'm an architect, recession was looming. I did a big interview in Dublin for the construction manager of the new Eco Village in Cloughjordan. It was a big job. I got a look at the other 5 candidates. They were all half my age and none of them wore an eye patch. And I got the job. So, that day I said, Liam, second life is not only caught up at first life, it's passed it out. I am back in this world as if, apart from the eye patch, I never had cancer at all. Now, we're going to turn this story into something unbelievable. I think Richie Flaherty is in the room somewhere. But there's one milestone still not done. I haven't run my first marathon post-cancer. And now that I have the 10Ks under my belt, I know that's the time is now. So in 2012, exactly 10 years after my survival, I'm going to run 3 marathons. First one, and I've hooked up with the fantastic people in Cancer Care West, the first one is going to be in Connemara in April. Then we're going to go to Liverpool in the summer, and we're going to finish in New York in November. The bid in those 3 marathons is to raise €3 million for the cancer patients coming after me, and for the research that will one day find a cure to this phenomenal disease. So I'm going to make cancer regret that it ever picked on me as a victim. Now that I've beaten it 5 years after remission, the fight isn't over. I'm going to say, you made a mistake. You made 2 mistakes. First of all, you let me live. The second is, you didn't deny me the ability to run again, because I'm going to raise the money that's going to wipe you out. And that's where I described to Cork earlier, through my recovery I was like a boxer with a towel over his tongue. That's where my focus has gone now. The fight isn't over. So, my inspiration for that is a fantastic girl in England called Jane Tomlinson. Jane was diagnosed with terminal cancer in 2001. And before she died in 2007, she raised 1.85 million sterling. And her foundation trust is now heading towards 5 million. Jane knew she had the CV and the torch to do that. And I believe I have it too, because my story has gone all over the world at this stage. I've had responses from Canada and New Zealand. It's that big, it's that strong, it's that inspirational. But when you combine the running, this is an unresolved milestone that I can now do. So I'm going to pick up where Jane Tomlinson left off. So, just to complete then, why am I here today? What do I all want you to take out of what I've said today? What I want you to do is, I want you to go home tonight, and I want you to have perspective. I want you to look in the mirror and say, I want you to get your bag of troubles and take half them out and throw them away. I've spoken to people in the last couple of years, and they said to me, "Jeez, we can't go to the Seychelles, we have to go to Portugal." I can't change my 10G car. It's going to be so embarrassing having the neighbours watch me driving around it for another year. I point to the eye patch. I say, you need to get yourself a real problem. So, I want you to look in the mirror, like maybe you haven't done for a long time, and see that you have two hands, you have two eyes, you have two legs, you have two ears, you have a brain, you have a family, you have a house, you have a car. I want you to think of the 3-year-old diagnosed with leukemia, the 17-year-old comes off a motorbike. I did this, I got ready to die, and I was surprised at what I found. I had lived a life, I got to the top of the curve, married a fantastic woman, I have 3 of my own kids. I could suddenly read the newspaper again, see all the people who didn't even get near to where I was, and I still would have died a young man. And you know, that made me as tough as anything. I had called cancer's bluff. I wasn't afraid to die. Nothing could touch me. My pain threshold went through the ceiling. It just I put all that away, I put it in a break glass case, I said, right, I know I've that covered, I don't need to go there now. I won't go there until every possible road has gone down here, and this guy is on the floor. 10 years later, he's not only on the floor, we're going to really do a huge job on him next year. So, I go to church every day. It's the one place I find you can stop the world for 2 minutes, and I just make the space to appreciate how good it is for me to be alive. I want you all to just take a little bit of that today. Life is a wonderful gift to us all. It's wonderful to be here. There is nothing but wonderful people in this room. There's more good than bad in every single one of us. So it's just great to be here. Take that with you. Go and cherish the rest of your lives and do all you can. Thank you.